All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. Pleasure to have you with us today and for this webinar. I want to formally welcome everyone to the Recognizing and Responding to Intimate Partner Violence for Ontario RAP Center's webinar, specifically for direct service providers. And we want to welcome everyone from across Ontario. This project has been able to reach a number of different regions, and it's been great to be able to do that in that capacity, so that we know that those of you who are tuning in might be coming in from all parts of Ontario, and we welcome you. Thank you for joining us, and I'll just outline some information about the handouts in a minute. But welcome, everyone. My name is Carol Soros, and I am a registered social worker and a consultant who is the program coordinator for this project, which has been just wonderful to work with. Out of this project, there is a primary platform that has been developed that kind of houses and just compiles all of the various outputs that we've been able to produce and develop as a partnership for this project. And you can find that all at rapworkers.com, rapworkers.com. And in addition to the training material, you'll find some of the resources that we'll be referring to today. Okay, so just to give you a bit of an introduction and background on the mission of the project. So the project itself, as I mentioned, was Ontario-wide, and the mission was to advance the capacity of resettlement assistance programs, or RAP programs, in Ontario as they identify and respond to incidents of abuse experienced by refugee women in particular. We know that there has been a large number of new families, new individuals who have come to Canada and Ontario, and so being able to address the various needs of these individuals has been part of what we've been looking at, and the government has paid attention to. So we are funded by IRCC, the Immigration, Refugee, and Citizenship Canada, and on behalf of Rexdale Women's Centre, who is the primary project holder and manager. Again, welcome. And so that's our mission. The primary objective for the project has been to expand the sector's existing knowledge base and to strengthen its capacity on a frontline staff, management, organization, and sector-wide basis. So we're looking at, various capacities, because we know that this issue is something that will need the support of and response from all levels within RAP centers. So in terms of partners for the project, so as I mentioned, Rexdale Women's Centre, who is the lead organization, had partnered with the Centre for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children, or CREVAC, and the Ontario Council of Agencies Serving Immigrants, or OCASI, to develop the content and materials, some of which we'll talk about today, others available on the RAP Workers site, adapt existing materials to the target group, which is refugee women and families who've experienced intimate partner violence, and to ensure sectoral representation within this partnership and the project itself. So we had the pleasure of also, coordinating an advisory committee representing agencies and expertise across Ontario. And so we had a wonderful group of Ontario RAP Centers partner agencies who also contributed to the conversation, to the development and review of all of the materials that were developed. So who is this webinar for? So this webinar specifically is for direct service providers, those who are working with refugee individuals, families, women and their families in some capacity, but specifically in RAP centers. and also the resettlement services supervisors, so those who manage, who support teams of individuals who provide those services directly. So what to expect? So this webinar will include the slides that you may be seeing right now. There will be a couple of different handouts that I've mentioned. There's actually three handouts that are associated with this particular webinar. Two in particular we'll be reviewing and referencing throughout this time. One just very slightly, and all are available through this webinar, but also at the wrapworkers.com website. So this webinar will be about 50 to 60 minutes or so, and the topics will include do's and don'ts, working with refugee women who have experienced intimate partner violence, and speaking to men who've used abuse or violence in their intimate partner relationships, and we'll touch on a few myths as well. So the agenda, just a little bit more specifically, we'll talk about that toolkit that was developed and just highlight some of those key bits of information that's in there. So the do's and don'ts, working with women who are refugees and experiencing intimate partner violence. Also speaking to men who've used violence in their intimate partner relationships. And within that, we'll be looking at the issues and needs. We'll be introducing that ears open approach. We'll be talking a little bit about the myths and including some tips preparing for conversations, and of course taking a look at how to assess for safety considerations. So you're ready in preparation for this webinar, this time that you have devoted here. Please just ensure that wherever possible, you may be listening to this at work or in a setting that may be conflicting with your interest, but wherever possible, minimize distractions. Go ahead and access those handouts now, or feel free to get them at your leisure. And to also take notes. It's really important. You know, we take in a certain amount of information, obviously, as we listen to it, but when we write down notes, our brain is really storing it in a different way, and we also have it to refer back to, because we may not necessarily have the time to come back and devote to listening to this webinar again, but we do have the main notes, things that you want to take away that really stand out for you, that you want to refer back to, available to you. All right, so the do's and don'ts document, that toolkit was developed to provide a condensed guide or just a resource toolkit to highlight recommendations for WRAP direct service workers regarding intimate partner violence identification and response. So I mentioned that at the WRAP Workers site, there is a very comprehensive training that's available. But we know that sometimes taking in that training may have to be done in stages based on other priorities and time constraints, and that once you have gone through and completed that training, that you may want to have some things that you can just sort of reference quickly. So this do's and don'ts documents is a wonderful way to do that, to highlight, to reinforce, to have sort of a quick reference. And so it really does outline what to do and what to avoid doing. And of course, it's not an exhaustive list, but it touches on some of the most important things. And so it's been framed in a way and organized in a way similar to most of the materials that we have developed for this project, which is recognize, initial phase, respond, what to do, and then the referrals, accessing other resources, consulting, all of those other things. So let's start with do's and don'ts in the stage of recognition, that early stage. And I'm going to just highlight a few of the do's. So what to do when exploring and identifying if a refugee woman might be experiencing intimate partner violence. Let's start there. So the first one is, do be aware of your own cultural and other biases. Cultural competence is key, and biases obviously in general is key. The WRAP Workers site does offer some information related to cultural competence, of course, but as service providers and those who supervise service providers, I think it's really important that we're able to understand the experiences, the belief systems, all of those things that we bring into any interaction and exchange with our clients. And so we know that when we um, not necessarily in a situation, but preferably before that, we know that we may have experienced something in our own lives. We may have cultural views that would impact what our response might be. And so being aware of that is really important. And it continues to be important even throughout the course of our, career. Next one is do be aware of her native language, her level of English, and resources needed in this regard. And so, of course, knowing that English may not be her first language, knowing that just certain nuances and phrases and ways of referencing things may not be something that she's familiar with. And so, being able to, you know, provide support, provide resources, provide information, and provide a response that is aligned with her current level of English and the supports or resources that she may need to fully understand, what you're able to bring to her, to discuss with her. That's very important. All right, and so again, in the initial stage of recognition, do talk with her when her partner is not present, preferably when she's alone. And this seems like common knowledge, but you'd be surprised at, sometimes unknowingly, people just know the family and they may pick up on something and try to or feel it's okay because they know the family or it seems okay to try to address it in the moment. And when it comes to intimate partner violence, sometimes we need to slow down the process and consider safety issues. And so if there are things that sort of raise a red flag or require further investigation, making sure that that exploration, those discussions are done when she's alone, and that may require some level of planning, and it might require some consultation. If the family's always seen together, it might require some strategy around how to do that, but it's very important that wherever possible, you are able to do that. Next one, do understand that she may not admit to or talk about the violence that she's experiencing. And so, obviously, this may be for so many reasons. It could be that there may be some fear, there could be some shame, there may be an inability to actually identify it or see it as abusive behavior. And then, of course, because of all of those reasons, not feeling as though she's in a position or wants to talk to you about the violence. So sometimes service providers just assume that if something's going on, you're offering help and you're exploring, that would be a perfect opportunity. But there's so many other elements and issues and barriers and considerations that also come into play there. So do also validate her feelings and experiences. Very important. Do remain aware of culture specific abusive behaviors, such as spreading rumors to dishonor the woman or threatening to destroy her passport. So while we know that intimate partner violence is not unique to refugee families, we do know that there are certain elements and types and forms that are unique. And so being aware that that might be existing over and above what you may see in another family is going to be very important in maintaining that awareness. So in terms of what not to do, in that early stage, that recognition stage, what not to do when exploring and identifying if a refugee woman might be experiencing intimate partner violence. First one, do not ignore concerns or issues related to intimate partner violence. And that can be a challenge for many people. Sometimes, there's that question of, is it intimate partner violence? Does she want to talk about it? What will be the response if it's raised? Um, Maybe you're feeling uncomfortable about the topic. Maybe you see it as a private family matter. Maybe you see the other issues that they have come to you for, the settlement, other issues as the priorities. Just inviting you and encouraging you to not ignore concerns or issues related to intimate partner violence. Do not assume that it can't be that bad or she would tell someone and or leave. As I referred to earlier, refugee women stay in a violent relationship for many reasons. And next one, do not assume that what she wants to do in any situation. So don't assume what she might want to do. And that sometimes comes from our own biases. We might feel as though we would do a certain thing or want to respond in a certain way, but we can't make those assumptions about the person who's in front of us. Do not ignore warning signs present by children. They are often hidden victims or silent witnesses of intimate partner violence. So sometimes the parents may seem okay, but there are things that are coming out in this child or children that cause you to wonder, is something going on with this family, right? Do not feel as though you have to have all the answers. Consult with colleagues and supervisors if you're unsure about what you're noticing. So yeah, sometimes we feel as though we should be able to handle everything, but we don't necessarily need to have all the answers, be able to address and respond and deal with every situation. And depending on the other resources that you may have at your agency, you might be able to access someone who is trained and works specifically with intimate partner violence that you can refer to, or you may just consult with that person, or you may have your supervisor that you can also consult with. So, in terms of the response, so once you've recognized and you've identified that there is some level of intimate partner violence existing, what do you do in terms of your response? So, what to do in response to a refugee woman who is experiencing intimate partner violence? So, first and foremost, do assess for her immediate safety needs. And so, hopefully, your agency has some sort of protocol around addressing safety for clients. But there are also a number of different resources that are out there, including some that we've referenced and added to our training and resource guide at the wrapworkers.com website. And of course, if you're not feeling comfortable, being able to at least ask some first preliminary questions and then providing her with resources and places that you can access to assess her safety further is a possibility and is an option available to all direct service staff. All right, and so do inform her of her rights in Canada. She may not know this yet, or she may know her rights somewhat, or she may be confused because she could have a partner who's telling her conflicting information. You will lose this. You will not be able to access this. You need to have me in order to be able to continue to do this. All of those kinds of things can, add to the confusion and the challenges that she's experiencing. So do inform her of her rights in Canada, those that you know, and where she can access information further. Do inform her that woman abuse is not tolerated in Canada and that many forms, including, for example, threats, physical assault, sexual offenses, are subject to charges under the Criminal Code of Canada. So, no, intimate partner violence is not culturally necessarily accepted, where she may come from, but it may be something that she has built up just sort of a level of acceptance around. Or maybe her experiences in her home country was that when you call the police, things get worse, or the response is not safe or responsive. Okay, so do inform her that it's not tolerated and many forms are subject to charges. Okay, and so do be aware of your own biases regarding what's been witnessed and or disclosed. And I just touched on that a little bit earlier, but it continues in terms of your response, not just in terms of whether or not you actually identify witness um, and can sort of notice that this is happening, but then your response also needs to come from a place that doesn't include those biases. Some others do use non-judgmental language, do ask open-ended questions, do acknowledge that this is difficult. Sometimes that putting that out there just in the setting allows you know, for both people to just recognize that this is not an easy topic and there's so many complicated and intersecting factors that have to be considered. And then do respect her choices, and they may not be what you necessarily um, agree or support or would like for her, but do respect her choices. And of course, there are going to be some exceptions to that. Do dispel myths if she has been threatened that she'll be deported if she does not remain with her partner or that she will no longer receive funds except through him. So, again, going back to some of the specific types of abuse, partner violence that can occur within refugee families, do dispel those myths wherever possible or refer her to someone who can help her. So, what not to do in terms of your response? What not to do in response to a woman who is experiencing intimate partner violence? Do not inform the accused that she is talking with you. Okay, so really important, particularly before you've even assessed her safety, but even ongoing. Do not inform the person, the partner, her husband, that she is talking with you. Okay? Do not make decisions for her. Okay? So it's okay to provide information. It's okay to help her to explore options, but do not make those decisions for her. Do not inform the accused that she's talking with you, I mentioned. Do not um, tell her what to do, including when to leave or when not to leave. Do not assume that she would prefer to seek support from within her cultural community. And sometimes that's the given. There's the assumption that there's that understanding there, but there could also be a fear or a shame that goes along with accessing services, disclosing intimate details within that community as well. So, not making that assumption with her. Do not give out information about her without her consent unless deemed necessary. So those exceptions. All right. And so obviously and hopefully your protocol within your agency will speak to that in terms of informed consent. Do not give her partner any information about her whereabouts should she separate from him. Okay, so that of course that's related to her safety. And do not assume sole responsibility for these situations. Collaboration is key, and I mentioned that before. You don't need to have all of the answers. You don't need to, you know, respond to and manage these situations on your own. You have resources within your agency, and I encourage you to find resources within the community that you can access readily, quickly, and effectively. All right, and so do's and don'ts related to refer, referring, and the referral process. So that stage where you've identified, so the recognition, the next stage where you have started to respond, and now the referral piece. So what to do when referring and or engaging additional resources and systems for a refugee woman who is experiencing intimate partner violence. So the first one, do help her to learn about resources that are available to her. Do help to find support groups or peer-based services in her community, if any are available, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, if she is receptive. Do help her to access financial and other resources that might be beneficial to her. And those resources may be a key component in what she decides to do in her situation. Do request written consent, so disclosure of information to speak or refer to external organizations. And I keep saying that, of course, there are exceptions. And do call ahead to any resources that she is being referred to ensure that services are still available. So key core services, like the Assaulted Women's Helpline, shelters in your community, many of those will still be available, but sometimes there are resources that unfortunately will come or amalgamate or just shift in terms of where they're located, how you access them. And so just being, mindful of that and calling ahead to any resources that she's being referred to will be helpful. So in terms of the referral stage, what not to do when referring and or engaging additional resources and systems for a refugee woman who's experiencing intimate partner violence. Do not make referrals without her permission. Okay? Next one, do not encourage or refer the woman and her partner to couples counseling without consultation from a Violence Against Women organization. And I do see this quite a bit in some of the other work that I do. Um, Quite often, people think that, well, if there is conflict, disagreements between partners, then they should go to couples counseling. But unfortunately, and to invite you to, if you haven't already gone through some of that training, to really make sure that you understand what's at the foundation of intimate partner violence and how it's different than partner conflict. And so going to couples counseling when there is intimate partner violence can increase safety concerns and risk for that woman. It can also lead to a place where he can continue to exercise, you know, abuse and abusive behavior in a setting like that. And there's so many other reasons. Couples counseling requires two people to be respectful, to be on the same page in terms of wanting the relationship to be healthy and equal. And quite often, unfortunately, when there's intimate partner violence, unless there's been some work done and some changes that have happened, that's not the case. All right. So next one, do not give her written or print referral material or resource information that might jeopardize her safety. And it's something that sometimes if you're not necessarily working in the intimate partner violence or domestic violence field, you don't think about. You might hand her a flyer or something that speaks to where she can call, groups she can go to, how she can get counseling, that kind of thing, or any other information that you may have. And she may or may not think about how putting that information in her purse or her bag that her partner might access could increase safety risk for her. So before giving her any written or print referral or resource information, make sure you touch on that with her. Does she feel safe taking it? You know, is there a risk that he may go through, and she may not even know that he has gone through or he goes through her belongings? And so, better to err on the side of safety. Right. So those are the key do's and don'ts from the toolkit that was developed throughout this project. I invite you to read through the complete document. There is more there, and to also, of course, access the training. So let's move on to speaking to men. Speaking to men who have used or there's some concern around their use of abuse or interpartner violence in their relationship. So the question that I would start with is, have you interacted or addressed the partners in cases of intimate partner violence? And if so, how did that go? Was it done or handled effectively to the extent that it could be? And if you haven't been, why not? Chances are that, many people have responded, that they have not. And some of the reasons include there's a fear of what the response is, fear of what that might mean for this family. Another reason is people sometimes, and we heard this through our focus group and survey data, that some people within RAP centers who are direct service providers are not feeling equipped and lack the knowledge or experience to respond in these situations, or at least they feel that they are. Sometimes it might be beliefs in terms of why you haven't necessarily addressed or spoken to the men or partners in these situations. And an example of that is that some people believe it's a family issue. And then there might be agency policies that limit or restrict you from speaking to or addressing the partner where there's suspected or confirmed intimate partner violence. So here's the issue. The issue is that providing effective, responsive settlement services requires that service providers work simultaneously with the women and their partner while keeping safety in mind at all stages along the settlement support journey. Of course, the degree to which each partner might be engaged will vary. However, some level of response is necessary and, in many cases, inevitable. And so, of course, you know this as the direct service provider, as the manager, supervisor to direct service providers, that at a very critical time for these families, settlement workers are conducting assessments and referrals that respond to the immediate needs of clients, and this includes the occurrence of intimate partner violence. It's impossible, unfortunately, because we know the statistics, it's impossible for intimate partner violence to not be an issue that at least some of your clients will be experiencing. And so when we're talking about a full assessment responding to the needs of clients, we see that very much from a holistic perspective, and that includes, are they safe? Are they experiencing intimate partner violence? And of course, what we've emphasized throughout this project is that direct service providers are not by any means assuming the position of a specialized violence intervention service provider, but the goal is to be adequately equipped to address the full spectrum of needs of the respective clientele who access resettlement services. So here's just a few comments that came out of that focus group data collected. One in particular related to men, since we're talking about speaking to men, is that many men have built a mentality and habit that intimate partner violence, is permissible, and we have to support them to break these old habits by educating and enforcing the laws. Education plays a huge role in preventative measures, and I strongly agree with that. Education does play a huge role. Okay. So the project response, amongst other things, was this toolkit, Speaking to Men, as well as the myths document, and it supports settlement workers as they consider dialogue with refugee men who are suspected of or reported to have used abuse in their intimate partner relationships. And so the primary goal through this document itself and this information is to dismantle power imbalances which maintain patterns of domination for all refugee men and their families. Why is it important? It's important to be able to, on some level, address and speak to men is because the person experiencing intimate partner violence, the refugee woman, may not leave her partner. And we know that many will not or do not. And so if we're not making attempts to address safety or improve or enhance that situation by talking to and trying to engage the man, it's a lost opportunity, I think. Intervention could be an opportunity to address safety, obviously. Resources might be offered to address concerns, resources for the men. There are programs out there. And then, of course, situations could escalate. In some cases, not addressing it with the partner could also, lead to a situation that's continuing to get worse as time goes on. So this toolkit outlined some key steps framed in what we called the ears open approach. And so the ears open approach is a general guiding framework for what is important to consider for conversations or interventions related to men who have or are suspected to have used violence in their intimate partner relationships. And we'll talk about that right now. So the E stands for exploring incidents and experiences of abuse with all refugee clients. All refugee clients being key there. And when your agency has a protocol in place that specifies we will be looking for signs of intimate partner violence, we will ask certain questions over and above their settlement needs and issues, then there's greater likelihood that these situations, these issues can be identified and responded to. The A stands for ask open-ended questions. And so using questions that don't incite or bring a one-word answer. Okay, give people an opportunity to share their narrative and their experiences through open-ended questions. The R stands for recording relevant information. So making sure, and again, referring to any protocols or policies that your agency has in place in terms of what you'll be recording in any client file. This becomes important should files be subpoenaed or information being needed for collaterals, legal matters, etc. S stands for safety. Safety should be considered at all stages or phases, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. The O stands for the outreach to consultants, referrals, or reporting as necessary, and very much like you were talking about in terms of the refugee woman, same applies to addressing, responding, speaking to the men. P stands for policies and protocols, and I've talked about that, brought that up a couple of times. There is an actual training as well as a protocol that's been developed through this project, and so I invite you and your organization to access that. But policies and protocols guide efficient service practices. It takes the uncertainty, the guesswork, the inconsistency out of that service delivery process. E is evaluation. So evaluation and revision of organizational processes should be ongoing. So how are you doing in this regard? We're talking about speaking to men. What are we doing well? What are we doing that could be done better? What do we need to revise, change, improve on? Those kinds of things. It should be an ongoing evaluation and change if necessary. And then the N stands for those biases again. So notice existing biases and identify personal training and development needs. So much like in working with the refugee woman and her family, speaking specifically about the men, notice any biases that you may have related to intimate partner violence and how you see him, his experience, you know, his role, his responsibility, his accountability, all of those kinds of things. And then, if necessary, identify personal training and development needs. So you may obviously, access the training and resources that we have available, but over and above that, what else would support you to, just make sure that you're coming to the service delivery process with the best possible stance. All right, and so that's the primary speaking to men toolkit, or at least some of the key parts of it. There's much more obviously in that document, and you have access to it. I invite you to read it in detail. There is another document, the Challenging the Myths document, and I've just highlighted a few, bits of information, key things to consider from that. So myths. First one, he wouldn't have hit her if it wasn't for the tremendous resettlement stress and adjustment issues. So some people think that, well, it's just because this time has been so challenging and he feels the sole responsibility and pressure. And so it's very time limited and stress induced what's happening in the family. And so it's important to note that, again, we're talking about intimate partner violence and that which is directed at his partner, not other people, and that she is also experiencing without, exception. She's also experiencing resettlement stress. And so that's not an excuse for or a rationalization for abuse. Another myth is that separation for the family is not good for the children. And of course, this may come from cultural beliefs or personal biases. But again, not making that choice for any family and knowing that there's been, research that does indicate that those children who stay in situations where their safety is at jeopardy, their mother's safety is constantly at risk, and the environment is not healthy, are impacted in a very significant way. Next one, intimate partner violence is a private family matter. And this myth is really not specific to um, refugee families. This is something that has been existing for years in all populations. And you may be thinking that that's the case, but I would invite you to just open your mind to the fact that there has been so much silence, and breaking silence sometimes is what brings about change. So, some tips going back to speaking to men, some tips related to creating the right setting, preparing for those conversations. So, the first one is discuss confidentiality and, of course, limits to confidentiality. And again, having a clear protocol in place and policies related to confidentiality will make this very, very clear. Acknowledge the presenting challenges in talking about the concerns. Make attempts to establish key rules for the conversation. Wherever possible, reference the concerning behavior itself. So, talk about the behavior that's happening, what is being done specifically, as opposed to, making the person feel as though they're attacked. We're just talking about ways to minimize some of the conflict that can and defensiveness that can obviously happen when we're speaking to men and addressing this issue. More tips: avoid confrontation, which can increase risk and impede communication. So the stance in which you present and initiate this conversation is going to be important. Do not breach the confidentiality of his partner and share information that she has disclosed. Very much, I mentioned earlier, not telling him that she's been speaking with you. Furthermore, do not breach your confidentiality by telling him specifically what she's been saying. Okay, that's very important. Avoid rationalizing or justifying his behavior. However, attempt to understand his perception of contributing factors, right? And so, not falling in the trap of saying, yes, I understand that, stress can cause people to do certain things, because we know that that is not the case when we're talking about intimate partner violence, but acknowledging separately that he and his family are experiencing stress at this time helps you to stay engaged. It's not an excuse for the behavior, but it's an understanding for all that the family may be going through. Okay, and also, continue to use those open-ended questions. All right, so moving on to assessing safety for initially the worker, of course, yourself, what to think about. Here are some things that will help to guide that consideration. So, what do you know already about him, about the family, about the woman? How does he present currently? So, if you're thinking about having a conversation with him, how is he presenting right in that moment? How has he presented previously in past interactions, conversations, settings? Next one, who can you consult with to plan for this interaction? So, who's available to you if there is an opportunity to plan in advance? Who can you talk to in advance? Is it the, you know, domestic violence worker? Is it a partner response worker? Is it your supervisor? Who can you consult with if there is time to plan? And then, of course, afterwards, who's available to debrief following the discussion, which is very important. Assessing safety for the woman. Is she or is he experiencing significant settlement distress? Is she very isolated with limited contact or communication opportunities? Does he blame her for their challenges or issues? Does he keep all of her legal documents? Does he monitor many, if not most, of her activities? Has she talked about separating from him? There's so much more that we've provided within the resource guide and through the training, and there's so many more tools to assess safety. These are just a few to consider as you are considering speaking to the men and assessing the woman at the same time. Assessing safety for the children. Where are the children during these incidents? How are the children impacted by the behavior? Does the partner involve the children in the interaction? Have the children ever been harmed by the partner? Has he ever threatened to take away the children? And of course, have child protection services already been involved with the family? All indicators of safety and level of safety for children. So, in terms of speaking to the men, you know, there's that stage of responding, and then there's the stage of community mobilization, resources, and referral. So, what do you say to that person in the moment in front of you, and what do you access to support, addressing this issue? So, it's important to know the community resources that are available. The PARS program, there's other resources and services out there. Establish relationships with community organizations, create collaborations. There may be already an opportunity to bring together, a couple of key agencies that would always be, you know, brought in these situations, and then always seek consultation. So, in speaking to men, final thoughts, it is a very complex process requiring thoughtful evaluation of various factors, and the primary consideration being the safety of the workers and the family involved. We know that this subject itself is not an easy one to respond to address, to deal with and manage effectively. And so just the men and the perpetrators itself, that piece can be very complex and complicated. Its safety is really the key and first, foremost, and guiding principle and factor throughout. So, also in terms of final thoughts, refugee clients will likely attend for services as a family unit and, as such, will require a fully responsive, inclusive approach to adequately and effectively address the scope of their needs. Right? They're going to, for the most part, come as a family unit. The husband or partner, with their partner, with the children possibly. And so looking at them from a fully responsive, inclusive, holistic approach really ensures that the full scope of their needs is being addressed. And that includes intimate partner violence, and that includes being able to speak to men to some level, or at least having an agency response related to the men. So I want to thank you. Thank you for joining us on behalf of Rexdale Women's Center and our funders, IRCC, Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. We hope that you've been able to take some information that you will be able to use in daily practice, because of course we don't want you to come and just listen and to learn some things, the real transformation, the real safety, the real enhanced services, and everything that we have strived for with this project comes from you applying it in your daily work. So we look forward to hearing how you're utilizing this information and the resources in your work. Again, extend that invitation to access all of the resources at the wrapworkers.com website. So thank you very much. And feel free to reach out to Rexdale Women's Center should you have any questions, concerns, comments, interests. We would love to hear about that. So take care and all the best. Bye for now.